Tonight we have 6 stories, from witches, odd creatures, the night shift, and a ritual story. Thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. Stories can either be submitted at my subreddit r/slumberreads, or my email that can be found in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Stay safe out there, enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. My parents told me a witch lived here. Beyond the densest clusters of gnarled roots and thorny bushes, there was a clearing, and in that clearing you'd find her cottage. The clearing was hidden in a perpetual fog, but through the mist, they said you could make out the 2 large sticks that marked the front door. You'd know it was her house by the skull suspended above those sticks. It belonged to some kind of deer in life, with huge, eyeless sockets forever watching the edge of the trees, and 2 long, ribbed horns snaking their way up into the sky like calcified vines that never found purchase. If I strayed too far into the forest, they said, she'd surely snatch me up. To my parents, it was a simple enough caution against wandering off and getting lost or kidnapped. But it was the mystery of the thing that inevitably drove me into the trees. The twisting branches of the canopy adorned the clouds like congealed veins, and paths through the underbrush would trace different routes than the day before. In the rainy seasons, every leaf swelled with droplets, and the ground became almost impassably muddy despite no rain ever breaching the dense thicket overhead. In the dry seasons, bugs would float like dust in an afternoon sunbeam, and a layer of moss upholstered every stone. My school friends and I would spend entire days in that forest. We'd identify landmarks, but had trouble finding them again. Sometimes they seemed much farther apart than we remembered. Other times we'd turn around and find them adjacent. Tricks of distorted childhood perception, I decided. Like when I fell and skinned my palm on the far side of the playground. I looked up towards the nurse's office in the main building and saw the black top stretch out forever in front of me like a dolly zoom in a thriller. But every evening, we'd still venture out from among the trees and make our ways home, if a little scratched and dirty for the trip. We always made sure to leave before sunset. We all knew about the witch. Even some of my friends, older brothers and sisters, knew about the witch. No one knew what she did to the kids she snatched, but everyone had a story they'd heard. Sometimes she ate the kids. Other times, she transformed them into animals. Some said that the forest itself was made up of children lost for so long they grew roots. We all wanted to find her, and while our games often involved playfully hunting the witch, we each silently hoped that we'd fail. Callum saw the witch once. He said he was walking along a stream bed when the sound of the stream faded away to nothing. He said he couldn't hear anything anymore. No flowing water, no wind, no birds or insects, just pure silence. And then a voice. A woman's voice, masked in echoes. The voice surrounded his head as if it came from everywhere at once. But Callum didn't feel afraid. The voice was gentle, and it asked him some questions about himself. At first, they were simple questions, autobiographical, and then the voice started asking him harder questions, like whether or not he felt good when he lied, or if one could ever truly act selflessly. And then he saw her, but he can't remember what she looked like. He said the image in his head was fuzzy. The other kids laughed at him and said he was making it up, but not me. If he had been making it up for attention, he wouldn't leave out the most important part. He'd give them a story about a wrinkled, warty crone, or perhaps even a preternaturally beautiful maiden, sustaining her youth through the absorption of children. But no, he said the image was fuzzy. That was the part that scared me the most. As a teenager, I brought girls into the forest with me. It was one of the only places where we could be alone, and the thrill of the dark never failed to spark a little intimacy. I would tell them ghost stories as we walked, and I pretended to point out signs of the supernatural around us. But once I sat a girl down on a fallen tree so I could step off the path to relieve myself. When I returned, she was gone. There was no doubt it was the same log, but she was nowhere to be found. I called out to her, certain that she had also gone to relieve herself, and heard no reply. I shouted for several minutes before giving up and collapsing on the log. I was more embarrassed than scared. Maybe she was playing a prank on me, and later she'd tell everyone about my panic. But as I peered through the trees, I realized that the crickets had stopped chirping. Then I remembered what Callum had said about the forest becoming silent, and I became aware of the ringing in my ears as my brain tried to make sense of the world without any oral stimulation. I thought I'd gone deaf. I froze where I sat, unsure if I'd be able to hear my voice if I cried out, unwilling to break the silence even by breathing. I waited for the voice. I imagined a creature surrounded by a bubble of silence. Wherever she went, the air around her ceased to conduct sound waves. What sort of a creature could do that? I held my breath for ages before a sound made me jump out of my skin. A frog croaked. Then, other nighttime sounds permeated the atmosphere until the forest felt alive again. I had to breathe manually, sucking in air, and releasing with intention to slow my heart. Still alone, I found my way out of the woods, like Orpheus leading Eurydice away from Hades. I did so without turning around, no matter how desperately I needed to check what was behind me. Only when I stepped into the glow of a streetlight on the edge of town did I glance back at the trees. I hadn't seen the witch, but she had seen me. She had watched and watched. In my mind, she was no longer human. From then on, she took on various forms anytime I envisioned her. Sometimes she appeared as a lumbering, bloated boar with an agonized human face, and sometimes she was a towering, tree-like expanse of blackness with piercing white holes where eyes might be. I never told anyone about this experience, in part because no one ever heard from the girl again. On my saner days, I tell myself that she might have slipped and broken her neck or something, and I feel a twinge of guilt. I imagine her lying there in shock, unable to call for help, until either the injury or starvation killed her. After that, I stayed away from the forest. We left for college, and the myths faded to the back of our minds as the normalcy of life took over. There is always a witch in every town. She might be the old woman in the rundown house around the corner, or the creaking sounds coming from the attic at night. Years later, I would learn that even a friend who had grown up in a suburb of a large city played in a park with its own witch's hut, the gardener's shed obscured behind a single line of shrubbery. Somehow this fear of the exiled has become innate. The fascination with the eccentricities of the occult exists throughout human history. Now we're quick to attribute irrational causation to any unexplained phenomena. Or else, we're all just brought up with fairy tales about how kids can get into trouble when they wander off. At any rate, I suppose that's why I'm here. My parents told me a witch lived here. As I personally watched the last tree fall at the hands of my crew, I can finally tell them they were wrong. But for some reason, I can't hear their chainsaws. I don't know who she was, but doctors tell me I'm lucky to be breathing. I think I'm finally ready to write about what happened last summer, with the warning that you should never, ever try to find the road I'm going to tell you about. I was out at Gambrill State Forest in Maryland one Sunday afternoon last summer. I had been out on those trails a number of times since I moved out this way, and knew them all by heart at this point. Some led you to fantastic vistas, and there was a lookout point that you could either hike or drive to for the best view in the county. On this particular day, it was humid and nearly 90 degrees, but the afternoon heat gave way to a light rain shower around 6 p.m. Perfect, I thought. Hiking in the woods after the rain was my favorite thing on earth. Something about the rain just brings in every sweet, earthy scent out of the ground and the flora, and it's just heavenly. When I got to the trailhead, there were only a couple other cars in the lot. Yes, I thought, I'll have the whole thing to myself. I hit the green trail, and typically I would follow it up to the blue trail and loop back around the yellow to the parking lot. But I was bored with this routine and wanted to try something new for a change. I came across an offshoot off the green trail I had always noticed but never thought much about. It looked like it had been a trail at one time, but it was unmarked now and terribly overgrown, with small trees and shrubs popping up right in the middle of it. It was in such a bad state that you really had to look carefully to realize it was a trail at all. The rest of the trails wound back up the mountainside toward the vistas, but this mysterious little one went further down the mountain. This one was also far less rocky than the marked trails, so I said what the heck. Let's see where it goes. Though it started out nearly wide enough to get a car through, about 10 minutes in, the trail got quite narrow as it wound downward across a dried riverbed and deeper into the woods. I saw no trace of footprints, litter, or any human activity. The woods were wonderfully quiet except for a deer I startled, which ran off in a huff. A big black form darting between the trees about 20 yards off. Around this time I noticed it was getting darker than I expected. The cloud cover made the darkness worse, and I was having a hard time picking out where this narrow trail was actually going. More than once, I wondered if I was even still on it. At one point, I looked to my left and saw a small opening in the forest about 40 feet away, and it would look like a paved road beyond. Yes, a road. It probably goes back up to the main road, I thought. So I'll head out and follow it back to the parking lot and get out of here before sundown. I managed to, carefully, step across some debris piled up on the creek bed and climb through a bank of ferns to get up to the road. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt and was concerned about ticks, so I gave myself a quick check over and had a look at my surroundings. The road was narrow, just wide enough for a single car to pass, and though paved, it was now crumbling. I got out my phone and checked Google Maps to see how far it would be to get back to the main road. Pulling up satellite view left me bewildered. It showed I was in the middle of the woods, with no road in sight. I looked up. The canopy was open enough above me that it should have shown the road. This was annoying, but not a huge deal. I figured I'd just have to follow the road back up the hill and see where it goes. An exhausting hike uphill for nearly 30 minutes led to nothing but a wall of forest. The road terminated into a little turnaround with a red 1990s Ford Taurus parked at the far end. It was covered in pollen and debris. Wondering how long it had been there, I wiped off a window to look inside. The interior was completely empty and perfectly intact. I checked maps again. It said I was still in the middle of the woods, nowhere near the main road, and about 2 miles from the parking lot. Damn it. I'm just going to have to go back the way I came and head back on the trail. Figuring the walk downhill would be quicker than the walk up, I set out. Night was falling fast, and I started power walking, cursing myself for not planning this adventure better. I made it back down to the approximate area I thought I came out of the woods from, but my heart sank when I realized I couldn't find the fern bank, the creek, or the trail. Just thick, black woods. Everything beyond the tree line looked the same. The sun had set by now, and daylight was rapidly fading. If I just ran back into the woods now and tried to find the trail, I could get extremely lost and end up spending the night in the wilderness with no tools, drinkable water, or weapons to fight off potential predators. I would have to find shelter. I walked a little further down the road and noticed an old shed. It was empty aside from a rusty old trailer hitch and a few old plastic buckets. It had a leaky roof, and the dirt floor was muddy from the recent rain, so it was less than ideal. But as I was checking it out, I noticed up an incline behind the shed was an old stone house. The house sat proudly atop a very steep embankment. Its walls were entirely stone and mortar. In the back was a balcony on the second floor with a rough-cut wooden railing. It had 2 brick chimneys, both painted red, and a green tin roof. The house was well preserved and looked almost inhabitable, except that the windows were blocked off by plywood boards. But the oddest thing about this house was the fact that it had no driveway. It was just a house about 50 feet up a nearly vertical hillside, in the middle of the woods. I decided to investigate, climbing up the embankment, wading through knee-high grass and thick brush, and made it to the top. The far side of the house was partially embedded in the forest, and vines were creeping onto the roof. In the fading light, I noticed one of the plywood boards obstructing a window had a loose nail, and I pulled on the corner. Several more rusted nails gave, and I yanked off the board. The grass itself was long gone, and before me was just a black, square hole. The air inside was thick and stale, and strongly musty. I used the flashlight app on my phone to inspect my dwelling for the night. The interior wasn't inviting. The house was empty of furniture and only had some old trash piled about, old paint cans, trash bags, a box of yellow newspapers, and old pulp fiction books. There was also a big, black trunk which was locked, and a cardboard box of what looked like dinnerware. The kitchen had a gaping hole in the wall where an old stove used to connect, and a porcelain bowl sink, blackened with years of dust and mold. A few empty cans of cleaning products littered the counter. Whoever owned it was using it as a dumpster. But why board up a dumpster? I love old stuff, and my curiosity was getting the better of me. I really wanted to check out the upstairs, but shining a light on the remnants of the ceiling, I could see a problem. I was looking right through to the floorboards of the upstairs, and with significant gaps and rot, they didn't look very safe. So I remained downstairs and sat down in a corner of what had once been a living room, opposite the window I came in. There I sat for the next several hours, surfing my phone until I started getting drowsy. Eventually, I fell asleep. A loud creak in the floorboard directly above my head woke me up suddenly. I waited, not making a sound. Was it an animal? Was it just an old house settling? I tried to turn my flashlight app on, but my phone battery had died while I was asleep. Damn it. It was now pitch black and absolutely silent. No creaking, no crickets outside, no wind, no rain, nothing. Like a grave. But out of nowhere I heard an elderly woman's feral voice upstairs ask a question in the darkness. "Byron, did you check the fetters?" Holy shit. Was someone actually living here? In a boarded up house with all this junk? She could have been a crazy hoarder or something. I didn't know what to do. I realized I hadn't seen the whole house. Maybe only one side had busted windows, and this woman may have just realized someone broke in. I needed to feel around the walls for the window I came in, and get the hell out of here. But as I stood up to leave, my blood turned to ice. I could feel someone in the darkness, standing directly in front of me. Whoever it was didn't make a sound. I stopped breathing. Several seconds passed. I shifted my weight ever so slightly from one leg to the other, the floor creaking slightly beneath me. Whoever it was didn't move. Several more agonizing seconds ticked by. Realizing I was inadvertently holding my breath, I exhaled loudly. Then a single word was uttered directly in my face, so close I could smell her denture breath. "Byron?" "Hello?" was all I could manage. As soon as I got the word out, I felt an ice-cold, clammy hand grasp my throat, squeezing with almost inhuman strength. I reached out in a panic and tried to grab her clothing. It was a thick, coarse material, like wool. Fumbling in the blackness, I found her face and was horrified when my fingers sank into it. Like a gelatinous, rotten roast beef. I tried to grab her hair to pull it, but there didn't seem to be any. She didn't make a sound, only wrapping a second icy hand around my throat, squeezing the air out of me. I started getting dizzy. I felt a pop in my neck, and bracing one foot against the wall behind me, shoved her backward and broke free of her grip, running and stumbling over trash, feeling around the blackness for the walls, and upon finding them, for the open window. I half ran, half tumbled down the hill, and it wasn't until I reached the road again that I realized I had been screaming every exhaled breath. It was still night, but there was just enough moonlight peeking through the cloud cover that I could see the road beneath my feet. Against my better judgment, I turned back and looked towards the house. For a moment, as my eyes adjusted to the faint moonlight, I saw a wiry black shape running down the steep embankment at full sprint, seemingly unaffected by gravity. She was coming straight at me like a starving animal. I dove into the woods opposite the road and ran faster than I've ever run in my life, scraped across the face, neck, and arms by tree branches, and at one point, smashing my right shin into a rock. I barely felt any of it. I ran like an Olympian until my legs gave out completely and collapsed to the forest floor, hyperventilating from exhaustion and cold terror. I laid there and listened for about a half hour. I heard crickets chirping, a light drizzle pattering on the trees. Just forest sounds. Whoever, whatever she was, she hadn't followed. I sat up and tried to wrap my head around what just happened and take stock. I had been running for about 15 minutes straight into the woods, so I was at least a mile from the house. I was also probably a mile from the trail, and in what direction, I had no idea. I got up and started walking. I realized that walking uphill would probably take me back toward my car, and it turned out to be right. After what seemed like an hour of hiking uphill, I made it back. I turned the car on. The clock said 5:14 a.m. Doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. My neck was purple and yellow with bruising, and x-rays showed my hyoid bone was fractured. It took me a few months to really recover from the shock, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever be able to process it. But I've tried to be brave and face my fear in the craziest way. I've tried to find my way back to the house. In broad daylight, of course. I wouldn't recommend this, but I had to do it. But the weirdest thing is, I checked both current and old maps of the park, and none of them show a road in the vicinity where I got lost. I've asked the rangers, and none of them have heard of any road out there. I even tried to retrace my steps through the old trail, and have never found anything but more woods. I guess I'll never know what happened. And maybe it's for the best. I've been poor my entire life. Hell, even the phone I'm typing this on was $70. I'm used to it by now. The electricity being off when I get home, shitty clothes, and that deep jealousy of people with more. The thing I cannot get over. The thing I fucking refuse to get over is my house. You can barely even call it a house. The disastrous wreck of a trailer is more like it. This thing has been through hell and back, and it certainly looks like it. Caved in ceilings, patchwork floors that I've fallen through. My brother sleeps on the fucking couch in the living room. And of course that back door. Our dog had gnawed its way through because of a thunderstorm so bad it shook the foundations of the house. We never had enough money to fix it, so there it sat, torn and disheveled. It hung limply from its hinges and swayed to and fro unless you gave it a huge tug and locked the bolt. Even then, an enormous 2-foot hole marred the shitty door. We could never afford to fix it, so there it sat, a clear mark of poverty, and unbeknownst to me, at the time, a clear invitation to whatever roamed outside. It was one of those nights. My family had been a tad less cheery than usual. The occasional death threat, the harsh insults, same old, same old. I just camped out in the musty room and waited for it to stop. As silence descended on the house, I stole quickly to the kitchen for something to eat. My phone in my hand, flashlight enabled. I winced as the inevitable creak gave its echo around the trailer. Of course I couldn't do this silently, yet as I paused to listen, I sighed softly. No grumbles or shouts of disapproval followed me. So I made my way to the fridge, eyeing everything I could. Finally something had gone well, I thought, as I grabbed a large box of cookies supplied by the local food drive. I couldn't help it. A slight smile crossed my face as I began tiptoeing back to my room. Every footstep was a challenge as I avoided all the weak spots in the wood, but as I heard another soft creak echo through the darkness, I knew I'd messed up. I nearly groaned at my clumsiness. I was still standing still when another creak echoed through the darkness just to my right. My head jerked around, and my blood ran colder than it ever had. Only a curtain separated me from the creak and that back door. I didn't make a sound. I stood drowning in the silence, each inhale shuddering as I struggled to keep absolutely quiet. Another soft creak tore through me like a bullet. I was shaking now. What was on the other side of this curtain? I slowly raised my hand, thinking wildly of how this was just like walking to my parents' room as a boy, having pissed my pants. With trembling fingers, I grasped the curtain in my hand and pulled it aside slowly, the light from my phone piercing the dark room. I couldn't move. My eyes were reflected in its own. Its eyes were the size of fists, and they mirrored mine, unflinching, unmoving, steady. My breath caught in my throat. I remember trying to scream, but I just couldn't. I just couldn't tear my eyes away from its overly large head, its pale white mottled skin, its long, spindly fingers, and worst of all, its thin, wide, face-splitting smile. It blinked. I ran. I ran to my bedroom and slammed the door closed with a mighty crash and locked the door. I sat in there gasping for air and shaking like a leaf as a warm liquid trailed down my leg. Its grin still etched upon the backs of my eyelids. I dared not close them. It was just then I heard people beginning to stir, beginning to wonder what the hell the noise was. Someone began banging on my door. I flung it open to reveal my mother's scarlet, angry face. What the hell? Immediately, though concern replaced her anger, I realized I was crying and shaking. I feebly pointed at the back door and begged to search the house with her shotgun. We found nothing, not a trace of the thing. It had vanished. And what's even worse, she didn't believe me, said it was a terrible dream. The next day I remembered what I had in my hand when I saw that thing. I had dropped all the cookies. As I looked down at the floor in front of the back door, I saw nothing but scratch marks and crumbs. I followed this line of crumbs with a feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach, almost knowing where it would lead. It stopped at the edge of the couch where my brother sleeps. I asked my brother if he saw anything weird that night. He told me to stop being such a scaredy cat. His words stung, because the first thing I did was run to my room and let this thing stare at my brother while he slept. I was just fired from my last job when I saw the ad. I was broke and needed more money to get by and pay my debts. And the local museum was offering $20 an hour to work the night shift. Thinking that this was an offer I couldn't refuse, I picked up the phone and called the museum. After arriving for my first shift, I went into my office only to find a note taped to the monitor. In big, blocky letters it said, "Rules for the night security guard." I read the list. 1. The doors to Exhibit E are to remain chained and bolted at all times. Never enter Exhibit E under any circumstance. 2. 1 hour after starting your shift, the power will go out. Leave your office. There will be a trail of red liquid leading to the storage room, where you will restore the power. Never leave the trail, and never look behind you after leaving your office while the power is out. If the liquid is any other color than red, or leads anywhere that is not the storage room, turn around and go back into the office. The power should return shortly. If the trail is still there after you turn the power back on, do not follow it. 3. If the doors to Exhibit E are open for any reason, leave the building immediately and return home. If the doors to the building are locked when you try to leave, pray, not for your safety, but that your death is faster than most. 4. The basement is the lowest floor of the building. If there are stairs leading below the basement, look down them. There will be one light bulb, and then the stairs turn out of sight. If the stairs match the description and the light is on, ignore them. If the light is out, or the stairs do not match the description, grab some raw meat from the break room fridge and throw it down the stairs. Leave the basement immediately after throwing the meat, but never run. 5. Be inside your office from 1 to 1:30 a.m. At 1:17, you will hear a heavy pounding at the office door. Ignore it. 6. If a camera is pitch black and says it is watching Exhibit E, shut the camera off immediately. If it does not turn off, smash the monitor. You will not be charged for replacing it. 7. If you hear crying coming from the basement, get some salt and pour it at the top of the stairs, from one wall to the other, with no gaps in the salt. 8. Never use the elevator. 9. If you enter the office at the start of your shift and your chair is facing the door, walk downstairs and hide in the break room. When the power goes out, repeat the steps in Rule 2. 10. If any light source in the building gains a red tint at any part of the night, cut the power of that entire area for the rest of the night, and do not enter that area. If this happens to your office or the break room, and you need to hide in either of those places, hide in the storage room. 11. If the phone starts ringing while the power is out, ignore it. If it rings while the power is on but you only hear static, do not hang up. Leave the phone far away from you. If the caller hangs up while you still have the phone, or you can still hear static after leaving the phone, exit the building immediately. Follow these rules, and you should survive your shift. I laughed, knowing it was just a joke from the guy who worked here before me. Then the power went out. I left the office. There was a red trail leading away from me. I grabbed my phone and turned on the torch. It's 9:13 p.m. It's been a few minutes since I started following the trail. I'm starting to hear whispers from all around me, except from in front of me. I don't think I'm safe. It's 11:24. I got the power back on without incident and went back to my office. The lights near Exhibit C turned red, so I turned the lights in there off. I went downstairs to grab some coffee to calm my nerves when I noticed some stairs leading down. The stairs went downward, then turned. The light bulb was off. I quickly made my way to the refrigerator in the break room and grabbed some raw steak. I went back to the stairs and hurled the meat down. I started to run. Then I remembered the fourth rule. A searing pain burnt down my leg. I hobbled up the stairs without looking back. It's 2:27. When I got back to my office, I checked the cameras. I went through the exhibits one by one, checking each one for a sign of a break-in. A, B, C, D, E, F, all clear. E. Exhibit E was one of the cameras. It was pitch black. I hurried to turn it off. The button was jammed. I took off my shoe and hurled it at the monitor. It shattered in a shower of glass. Then the pounding started. Horrid, monstrous pounding. It went on for what felt like hours. It stopped, and it took me half an hour to gather the strength to check outside. There were bloody handprints on the door, as if a man with no skin were pounding on it. It's 4:19. I saw the elevator open on one of the cameras, but ignored it. I heard crying coming from the basement. Fortunately, the man who wrote the note left some salt with me. I poured it on the stairs, forming a wall, and the crying stopped. I realized then that everything was written in the rules had happened, except for one thing, which I prayed wouldn't. It's 7:38. I'm back at my apartment, with my first and final paycheck from that wretched museum. After writing my last update, the basement break room lights turned red, and I went upstairs to shut them off when I noticed the doors to Exhibit E were wide open. I couldn't see inside. There were lights above that shone on the door, but the darkness seemed to form a wall, letting no light through. That was the last straw. I ran as fast and as far as I could out of that museum, and thankfully made it home. I'm never going back there, and wanted to warn everyone here to avoid shady jobs that pay too well. My father works 2 jobs, so you can already tell we're pretty low on money. We sometimes have to move around a lot and try to find better houses for better prices. My mom works in a kitchen at an elementary school, and I'm only in middle school, so we try our best to stay in one town at a time. By the end of the school year, my mom had found a pretty cheap house for us to live in near the south. I begged and pleaded for us not to move because I had so many friends and memories in the current town we lived in. But they denied all of my issues as me being stubborn. Once we moved and arrived at the house, I must say I was impressed. It was quite a lot bigger than the previous one we had, but a lot more secluded. When our stuff was unloaded off the truck, I immediately started to unpack my things. I'm a very independent person, so I was able to unpack all my stuff and hang up all my posters by lunchtime that day. The only thing left was my TV and bed, which my father said he would do later. Thankfully, there were no new people I had to introduce myself to. But that wasn't on my mind at the time. When we were pulling up to the house, I saw an abandoned one just sitting across from ours. It intrigued me, and I wanted to explore it. I imagined no one had lived there in years, so I thought it would be fine. I went back outside and headed towards the house when all of a sudden I got this weird feeling in my stomach. Not nausea, just a bad feeling like something was wrong. I stared at the house one more time, and the more I did, the more I noticed how bad it was. There were actually many cracks in the walls. The door was busted down. The windows have been shattered. Some of the roof was missing, and I couldn't shake the feeling something was in that house. Not an animal or a person, but just something. I decided to go back inside and entertain myself another way. It was a Sunday, so my dad had gone back to work after lunch, leaving just me and my mom. She said she had to go to the store, and she wouldn't be back for a while, and asked if I would be okay by myself. I know we just moved here and all, but we can't order takeout forever. Besides, this gives you some time to explore. I watched as my mom walked out the door and drove off, leaving me alone. A few minutes go by and that's when I heard it. The unusual pattern of knocks at the front door caught me by surprise as I started to walk back to my room. As I went up to the door, I kept wondering who could have been here in such a short amount of time. Who knew that we had just moved in, and how? I looked through the peephole, and to my surprise, saw a girl about my age standing there looking around. She wore her long black hair in braids, with red ribbons at the end. Her white shirt with a black peace sign on it matched perfectly with the black skirt she was wearing. She wore silver round glasses that reflected the sun. Oddly enough, she reminded me of my mom. The mystery girl knocked again in the strange pattern, and I opened the door. "Hello there, I'm Carrie. I saw you guys pull up to this house and I wanted to greet you all." Something about this girl didn't sit right with me. If she had seen us coming, why did she wait until I was alone to come drop by? "Oh yeah, just arrived here a little while ago. I'm Samuel. Where do you live?" I asked nervously. "Oh, I don't live that far," she explained. "Just a few minutes down the road." I hadn't realized I stepped outside and shut the door behind me as she was talking. Carrie smiled. "You know, they say that house over there is haunted." She scoffed as she pointed to the house across from mine. Do you like that sort of stuff? I nodded and explained my love for all things horror to her. Carrie asked if I wanted to go inside with her, and I immediately agreed. Somehow I wasn't disturbed by her or the house anymore. We quickly ran over to the house and stopped at the busted down door. I peered inside and was more shocked to see what was inside rather than out. The inside of the house was surprisingly clean and appeared to be taken care of. Carrie noticed my expression and pulled me inside quickly, like she didn't want anything else to be seen. I've been trying to fix up this place for a while to make it into some sort of hangout spot. No one has lived in this house for years, so I thought, what's the harm? For a frail girl, she was incredibly strong and pulled me all the way up the stairs. This house was taller than mine, having 2 stories, and apparently more elegant. I was able to only get glimpses of what was around me, and was awed by how much work had been done to fix this house. She had brought me to a room that was quite similar to a girl's bedroom. I like to work in this room the most. To me, this room feels comforting like mine at home. There were a vast amount of beautiful paintings scattering across the walls, each one more unique than the next. A navy blue couch sat up against the wall next to the door we entered from. In front of it was a fairly sized TV up against the wall. In the middle of both was a little glass table with a few books and a remote laying on it. In a glimpse, I noticed all of the books were horror novels, specifically murder mysteries. Carrie immediately snapped her fingers to grab my attention back to her. Hello, Earth to Sam. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Just taken back by how cool this room is. We headed back downstairs when I noticed a room that I could have sworn I never saw before. Even worse, the more I stared at the door, the more I noticed how old and rusted it was. The door handle was barely intact, and would most likely fall off if someone had so much laid a finger on it. I was slowly reaching the door handle when I was suddenly yanked away by a strong force. I thought it was Carrie, so I turned around to complain. But she wasn't there. I was standing outside the abandoned house. I walked back to my house questioning whether or not what just happened was real. I got inside and found my dad sitting at the kitchen table. Hey kiddo, where have you been all day? Your mom said she was going to be out for a while, so I decided to end my shift early. I grabbed a water bottle from the fridge and started to put grape flavoring in it. I've been at the house across the street all day. This nice girl named Carrie came by and asked if I wanted to explore it with her. She said it was haunted, but in reality, she's been planning on turning the rundown house into a hangout spot. Carrie's already done so much to it. Isn't that just so cool? My dad laughed. That sounds great, Samuel. But you don't happen to have a crush on this mystery girl, do you? Dad, come on now, I exclaimed in embarrassment as I went back into my room. My bed had been put together, and a pair of sheets and a blanket lay on top of the mattress. I put them on, and went back into the kitchen to see my mom enter in with a bunch of groceries. Once we ate dinner, we parted ways back to our rooms, and after a while I went to bed dreaming of living in the house across the street when it was all fixed up with Carrie. Just her and me. The next day I woke up pretty late in the afternoon to find my parents gone. I checked my phone and saw my mom had texted an hour ago, saying that they would be gone for a while doing errands. I got dressed and walked to the kitchen for some food when I heard a familiar sound. I grabbed a banana and rushed over to the front door to greet a pretty face. Carrie stood there wearing a pastel green shirt and jean shorts. Her hair was down and she was wearing a green headband. Ready to go? We ran over to the old house and walked inside. I immediately remembered what had happened yesterday and grabbed her hand before she could walk up the stairs. Hey, so when we went downstairs I found this old-looking door over there. I began slowly as I pointed over to the door by the stairs. I was going to ask you about it, but you kind of just disappeared. What's up with that? She looked at me confused and smiled nervously. Oh, that room? Yeah, I need to fix that door. I've just been storing a bunch of trash in there. I've been meaning to do something about that, but I've been distracted with other things. Completely ignoring my question about her disappearing, she walked over to the kitchen area and beckoned me to follow. I still had the creeps about the door in that so-called trash room, but I walked away from it anyways. The kitchen was huge, along with the living room, and the countertops had tiny potted plants all lined in a neat row. Carrie grabbed chocolate bars from the fridge and handed them to me. Can you hold on to mine? I gotta check on something. I started eating mine while she walked away from sight. I went to grab my phone when I realized I left it in the room at home. I started to gaze around when I saw Carrie had left the fridge open. As I went to close it, I froze in my tracks with pure terror. I stood in front of the fridge, but all the food was old and rotting. Flies flew over disgusting black fruit as the light inside flickered on and off constantly. I closed the fridge and looked back at the living room. I wish I hadn't. The big TV on the wall was barely hanging on. Its screen was shattered with glass all around it, and the wires were all disconnected. The velvet red couches had holes in them, and they seemed to be so beat up. The wallpaper was tearing off and the actual walls were stained yellow with age. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder quickly turn me around. There stood a worried Carrie, now with both of her hands on my shoulders. "Oh my God, Samuel, are you okay? I saw you about to faint while I was walking back in. What the hell happened?" I suddenly got that same feeling in my stomach when I first approached the house and saw Carrie for the first time. "I'm fine, Carrie. Really, I am. I just remembered I have to do a lot of chores at home. I'll see you later." Before she could say anything else, I rushed out of that place and ran all the way home. I quickly locked the front and back door out of paranoia and sped to my room. I grabbed my laptop and began to type. Effects of staring at something for too long. I scrolled through pages and pages on so many different websites until I found it. The title of an article read, "The more you stare, the higher your death rate increases," in big bold letters. I clicked on it and was immediately taken to a website about the unknown, the supernatural, if you will. Sightings upon sightings of a creature known to play with your mind has been seen all throughout the state of Texas. It craves attention and will mess with its victims until they drop. The creature mostly goes for rundown buildings, abandoned houses, and campsites, and has even been reported to attack an old classroom in an occupied school. The very few victims who have survived attacks from this mystery creature claim it calls itself by the names of loved ones they've never known about. That select amount of survivors all have the same story. They meet a mystery person that knocks on their door in a strange way. Then they spend time with that person in abandoned and rundown places until they realize how bad it is. This creature can turn anything bad into a fanciful world, but if you stare at a certain area for too long, you'll see how awful the place you're in really is. Multiple victims have been found dead in said rundown places. Their heads have holes drilled in them, their brains have been mushed and stared with wooden sticks. Some victims have been found with numerous body parts severed off and eaten almost entirely. Be careful you don't encounter this rabid creature. Underneath this paragraph was a huge list of names, who I assumed were dead victims. Amy, Leon, Brody, Justin, and Justine, etc. Suddenly I heard the door unlock and people enter the house. My dad called for me for dinner and I sat at the table, nervous to ask the question that had been rattling in my brain for so long. "Do we have anyone in our family named Carrie?" My parents stopped eating and looked at each other. "Well, I suppose you're old enough to know about her." My mother started. "Yes, we do have a family member named Carrie. In fact, she's my sister. We were identical twins. We both had long black hair and the same round silver glasses. As much as we looked alike, we were both fairly different personality-wise. Mainly, she wasn't mentally okay. She was taken to many places and actually, by your age, she decided to jump off the overpass while our family was on a trip. We didn't tell anyone about Carrie because of all the gruesome things she would do to animals and sometimes almost to people." "How do you know about her?" I froze in my seat, stunned by what I was just told. I regretted even opening my mouth in the first place. I excused myself, ignoring my mother's question of my knowledge of her deranged sister. I ran to my room once more and opened the curtains to my window. I peered outside and fixed my gaze on the house I thought was safe. It looked horrifying in the dark, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Carrie was watching me through the little window in her personal room. The next days weren't how I imagined them going. No new knocks on the door, no people walking in and out of the house, and thankfully no Carrie. 3 months go by and, to my surprise, my dad had found a better house for a better price in our old hometown. I was relieved we were moving and immediately began to pack. Soon enough, we left our house in the south and moved back home. I recently turned 23 this week and decided to revisit our old secluded home. I remembered everything clearly and reread this article I found about Carrie all those years ago. When I approached the house, I didn't get that strange feeling in my stomach anymore. The house we lived in hadn't had any newcomers, so I figured that it got lonely. Seeing as how whatever creature she was craved attention to survive. I walked in and almost immediately broke the doorknob. The walkway was composed of old, rotting, decaying wood. The kitchen and living room were the same terrifying old messes they were those many years ago. I walked up the old withered stairs and up to the hangout spot above. The open area reeked of decaying animals like squirrels, possums, and rats. The room she had turned into her own was even worse. There was dried blood everywhere, all over the walls and floor. The pictures were ripped apart. The couch was beaten and torn, and the TV was shattered into millions of glass shards. There were chalk body outlines all over the floor like you see in those detective movies. I looked over to the glass table and noticed how it was somehow still intact. I examined the books that were once ghost stories. Had turned into something completely different. They were murder cases. I flipped through each one, reading every name aloud. Henry, Marianne, Scarlett, Peter, Kobe, etc. Then I stopped at one I recognized all too well. Amy. That was one of the girls' names in the article. I dropped the cases and rushed downstairs until I was met with my worst nightmare. The old rusted metal door stood before me. Its doorknob laid at my feet. I forced my way in and was greeted with a strong putrid smell. What I saw before me was probably one of the most gruesome scenes I had ever witnessed. Carrie's idea of trash surely met up to her expectations, was all I could think. Numerous bodies were sprawled across the room. Many were severed in half, eaten, had holes drilled in their heads with sticks, or all three. The names of each victim were written in their own blood on the ceiling. I read each one, slowly realizing how many names there actually were. 25 names in total. That's when I saw the most horrific thing sprawling across the wall opposite of the door. In big letters that were scratched into the wall was the name Samuel Simmons. Everywhere I looked, my name was scratched deep into the wall with blood splatters on letters here and there. Up against that same wall was a melted chocolate bar, the one I assume Carrie gave to me when I was only 15. I walked out of that house and immediately called the police about my discovery. They arrived shortly and I told them everything. About how I used to live here, about the house, about the cases, about the bodies, and about Carrie. They told me that this wasn't the first time someone had reported something like this, which didn't really surprise me. After reading about those dead kids, how could the police not be involved? They thanked me for the information and drove off. I got back into my car and sped off as quickly as I could away from that nightmare. I slowed down once I was on the highway and tried desperately to take my mind off of it. When all of a sudden the image of Carrie's appearance when we first met popped into my mind. She was just standing there smiling, but then her smile got wider, spreading from ear to ear. Her skin started to rot and decay away, revealing charcoal black skin. Her once beautiful eyes had sunken deep into her head and became black empty voids. As she grew taller and thinner, I snapped back into reality and was thankfully still at the red light. I sighed a sigh of relief as it turned green and started driving again. Hey, do you hear someone knocking? A few years ago, my friend Josh asked me a simple question. Have you heard of the mirror game? Of course I didn't know what he was talking about. It seemed to be one of those questions where the inquirer just asked because they wanted to tell you about it. He always asked me about obscure movies and songs. Always aware that I didn't know any of them. That was just the way he was. So when he asked me about the mirror game, I had taken it as just another one of those obscure references. Nothing more than a book or movie that never made it big. I haven't heard about it. What is it? I asked him. He grinned at me. I'll show you. He got up from his chair and went to dim the lights. Then he left the room only to return with a knife and a handheld mirror. Whoa, what do you have the knife for? I asked. Don't worry, it's not for cutting yourself if that's what you're wondering. He sat the mirror on the table and handed me the knife. Before we start, there are some rules that you absolutely need to follow. I nodded. Go ahead. First rule, never let go of that knife. No matter what happens, Do not drop it until you hear me say the special word. What's the special word? I'll tell you after I finish the rules. Don't interrupt. I rolled my eyes and he glared at me. I mean it. If you don't take this seriously, then forget I said anything. Don't treat it like a game. It's called the mirror game, though. Thought it was a game. That's just what it's called. I didn't name it. I guess it's a game, but it's still a serious game. Now let me finish. The next rule is, do not say the special word out loud, or even think about it. Do not even mouth the words, or write it down. Bury in the depths of your mind. Do not say it, even if I ask you what the word is. The third rule, don't go too far from the mirror. You don't have to pick it up and carry it with you, but try to always stay within sight of it. If you lose sight of it, don't panic. Just calmly but briskly walk to where it is. Last rule, remember that you are doing this. Sometimes I forget I'm playing the game, but I look at the knife I'm holding and remember I have to go back. When you're playing it, it's almost like it tries to make you forget what you're doing. What type of game is this? I know there are a lot of rules. Just repeat them for me, so I know you got them all. Josh said. Hold on to the knife at all times until you say the word. Don't say or even think about the special word. Stay close to the mirror. Remember, I am playing a game. Not a game. Remember, you're playing the game. Okay, so what's the word? He turned the mirror so that it was facing down on the table and leaned in closer to my ear. He whispered so quietly that I almost didn't hear him. Aliorsis. I nodded. Repeat the word, he said. You just told me not to in the rules. I replied. It was a test. You passed. Good job. He then put the mirror back so that I saw my reflection in the dim light, and I stared into it. I'm going to walk you through it, and when it's time to come back out, just repeat the steps. It will be a bit different when you do it by yourself, but remember that you stare into the mirror itself, not your own reflection. It shouldn't take as long, though. I took a deep breath in. Stare into the mirror. I began staring into the mirror as he said. I also began to question his sanity a bit. I mean, who even comes up with this stuff? 5 minutes into the staring contest between myself and the mirror, I began to notice strange things. My body started to tingle slightly, and my reflection began to look more transparent. Josh, is it normal to see changes in the mirror? Yes, it's normal. I gripped my knife harder. I was staring so deeply into the mirror, it felt as though I was being pulled into it. Josh? I called out. What the hell? I heard from his kitchen. It was my voice. How is that possible? I whispered to myself in shock. Hey, who are you? The other me yelled as he walked towards me. I held the knife out, almost dropping it because of how much my hands were shaking. Don't come any closer, I yelled. Tell me what's going on. The other me stood still, hands in the air. Why don't you tell me? This is my house. My vision started to go dark around the edges. I was hyperventilating. I needed to calm down. Go back into the kitchen, I yelled. The other me slowly walked away, hands still in the air. As soon as he left my sight, I looked into the mirror and I tried to focus. Josh hadn't explained how to get back. Then I heard it, from the other side. Aliorsis. It was hard to concentrate when I was so focused on the other me being somewhere behind me, but I eventually felt that pull, and I realized I was back on my side of the mirror. Josh, I yelled. He looked at me and smiled. Trippy, right? I dropped the knife and punched him hard in the jaw, causing him to fall over. What the hell was that? Hey, relax, he said, scrambling away from me. What do you mean, relax? You could have killed me. Get out of my house. Wait. Don't you want to know what that was? You should have told me what that was before sending me there, you asshole. Would you have gone if I told you what it was? Would you have even believed me? Doesn't matter. Why would you even think of doing that to someone, especially a friend? I didn't think you would get so angry. You're right, you didn't think. Let me explain, okay? You've got 2 minutes. He sighed. I found the game online. I thought it looked kind of fun, but I didn't think it would work. When I did it for the first time, I did it alone. It's a bit different when you do it that way. Harder to come back. I actually didn't realize I had crossed over until I noticed myself standing behind me. We talked for a while, But he was acting really weird, so I went back to my side of the mirror. I did it a few more times as the days went on, and I realized that he was trying to get to this side of the mirror. I haven't done it since. I think you get about 5 times to do it. Maximum 10 minutes each time before they start to try to trick you into staying on the mirror side. What? Yeah. No, I mean, explain more. Oh, well... He would try to get me to watch a movie, or go outside for a walk with him. He wanted me to get as far away from the mirror as I could. Did you happen to look outside at all while you were there? I don't think so. Trust me, if you did, you would know. The outside is weird in that place. It looks normal at first, but the farther you look from the mirror, it's just really creepy. What do you mean? It looks unfinished, like a sketch. Actually, exactly like a sketch, or a rough draft. I looked out the window, and the end of my street was white like paper, and the houses were inked outlines. He really wanted me outside. I think he wanted to get me outside the house so we could run back and lock the door for full access to the mirror. Why wouldn't you tell me that before sending me over there? You wouldn't have gone. Thanks for explaining. Take the mirror out of my house and don't ever come back. Come on. Don't you find it interesting? No. He looked disappointed, but he took the mirror and left. I haven't seen him since. Sometimes I wonder if he ever played the game again and got stuck inside the mirror. I've moved on with my life, and I hope he has too. But every once in a while, I swear my reflection has a mind of its own. Hey everybody, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. It was definitely a pretty interesting lineup. It's been a long time since I've had any witch stories to narrate, and you guys know how I am about the rule stories. I'm always on the lookout for those. So I hope you guys enjoyed them. We have a few minutes here at the end of the video, so I figured I would take the opportunity to talk about my subreddit, because I feel like I don't talk about it enough. If any of you guys have any stories that you would like to submit, the best place to submit stories is my subreddit. I'll have it as top link in the description. No pressure, but I'm mainly just talking to the people that have something that they want to submit but don't know where to submit it. I'll have it as top link in the description. It's always appreciated. I can't count the amount of times where I've been just like 5 minutes short on a video, and having something on the subreddit to read has completely saved it. My ultimate goal is to someday thrive off of the subreddit alone. Right now I narrate a lot of stories from No Sleep, Let's Not Meet, r/ghost stories, places like that, with permission from the respective authors, of course. Right now on the subreddit I want to say we're at like 350 members, which is super awesome. I can't thank everybody who's joined enough. One of the really cool things about submitting a story, or even just being a member on the subreddit, is you can see stories that other people have submitted. So you can actually read stories before they're even narrated on the channel. You could be clicking on a video that was uploaded 10 seconds ago and comment like something about the ending, and everybody's gonna think you're just some mastermind. Like, how did he know? How did he know? Look at the dates. The numbers, Mason. What do they mean? I don't know what I'm talking about. Basically what I'm saying is, if you guys have any stories that you want to submit, the subreddit is the best place to do it, and I would appreciate it a ton. I oftentimes see people comment stuff like, I want to send in a story, but I'm not sure if it's good enough. The worst thing that could happen is it just doesn't get read on the channel. And there's a lot of entertainment to be had in just simplicity too. I mean, even if you just got a story of a ghost in your basement and one time it like threw something off the counter, I mean, I would consider that good enough. I would definitely throw that in a ghost story video, because even though it might not sound really terrifying in words, it's definitely still a terrifying experience. And I'm sure a lot of you guys know I hate to break this fourth wall, but this channel is mostly comprised of fiction, so if you want to send in a story, fictional is cool. I love fictional stories, and most of this channel is comprised of just that. True stories are welcome too, as long as you think that they're safe for YouTube, as long as you're comfortable with sharing it. But yeah, with all of that being said, thank you guys so much for the support on the channel. We're coming up on 75K. I never thought I would see the day. It's crazy, and I'm very appreciative for it. But as always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video once again. I hope you guys have a great night, and I will talk to you guys later. Good night, everyone.